The evening lights of Manhattan sparkled like scattered diamonds against the darkening sky as Damon Carter stood at his penthouse window, nursing a glass of aged whiskey. At 35, he had everything money could buy: the top floor of the city's most exclusive building, a collection of cars that would make collectors weep, and enough wealth to last several lifetimes. But tonight, something felt different. The soft murmur of conversation and laughter drifted from his private poker room, where 4 other billionaires sat around a custom-made table, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. These weekly games had become more about one-upmanship than cards, a chance for the ultra-wealthy to prove their superiority through increasingly outlandish bets. Damon turned from the window, his Italian leather shoes silent against the marble floor as he rejoined the game. The air was thick with cigar smoke and ego. "Gentlemen," he said, settling into his chair, "let's make things interesting." Richard Chen, the youngest among them at 32, raised an eyebrow. "Your definition of interesting usually costs me a few million, Carter." The others chuckled, their jewelry catching the light as they reached for their drinks. "Not everything's about money," Damon replied, though his life had revolved around exactly that since he sold his first tech company at 27. "What about a real challenge?" James Wilson, a silver-haired venture capitalist, leaned forward. "We're listening." His eyes held that familiar glint of someone who'd made his fortune betting on the right opportunities. "I bet I can take anyone, absolutely anyone, and turn them into a successful executive within 6 months." The words left Damon's mouth before he fully thought them through, but he didn't care. He was tired of the usual wagers about cars and real estate. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in skeptical laughter. "Anyone?" Richard asked, wiping tears from his eyes. "That's a bit broad, don't you think?" James stood up and walked to the window, gesturing for the others to join him. 28 floors below, the city's less fortunate gathered around steam grates for warmth. "What about her?" He pointed to a figure huddled in a doorway. "The one with the shopping cart." Damon's heart skipped a beat, but his face remained impassive. He hadn't expected this turn, but backing down wasn't in his nature. "Done." "Stakes?" Richard asked, already pulling out his phone to document the bet. 50 million, James suggested, turning to face Damen. "And to make it interesting, you have to do the training yourself. No pawning it off on your HR department." The other men whistled at the amount, but Damon merely shrugged. "Money's just numbers on a screen at this point, gentlemen." "But fine, 50 million it is." They spent the next hour drafting the terms, their cards forgotten. Damon would have 6 months. The woman would need to successfully manage a department in one of their companies, complete with staff and real responsibilities. No shortcuts, no fake positions. As his guests left that night, Damon returned to the window. The figure was still there, unaware that her life was about to change dramatically. He felt a twinge of something unfamiliar. Was it guilt? He pushed the feeling aside. After all, he was about to offer someone a chance at a completely new life. What could be wrong with that? Little did Damen know, as he planned his strategy that night, that this bet would crack open his carefully constructed world and force him to question everything he thought he knew about success, worth, and happiness. The next morning wouldn't just change the life of the woman on the street, it would begin a transformation that would shake Damon Carter's world to its very foundation. He ordered his assistant to clear his schedule for the next day. For the first time in years, Damon Carter would step out of his tower and walk among the people he usually only saw from above. He spent hours in his home office that night, researching approaches to help someone transition from homelessness to corporate life. But all his expensive education and business experience felt suddenly inadequate for the task ahead. As he finally headed to bed, the city lights casting shadows across his bedroom, Damon couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just set something massive in motion. Whether it would end in triumph or disaster remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: nothing would be quite the same after tomorrow. The morning air bit with unexpected sharpness as Damon stepped out of his building's heated lobby. For the first time in years, he wasn't heading straight to his waiting car. Instead, he stood on the sidewalk, feeling oddly exposed in his casual clothes, a simple sweater and jeans that still probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He spotted her immediately. In the harsh morning light, she looked younger than he'd expected. Her clothes were worn but clean, her shopping cart organized with a precision that caught his attention. She was helping an elderly man with a cane settle onto a bench, making sure he was comfortable before returning to her spot near the building's service entrance. Damon approached slowly, suddenly aware that all his rehearsed speeches felt hollow. She noticed him before he reached her, her body tensing slightly though her expression remained calm. Her eyes, a striking shade of brown, assessed him with surprising sharpness. "Good morning," he started, trying to sound casual. "I'm Damon." "I know who you are," she replied, her voice clearer and stronger than he'd expected. "Your picture's on the building." She gestured upward with a slight smile that held no warmth. "I'm Rose." Damon shifted uncomfortably, realizing he'd never actually looked at his own building from street level. "I have a proposition for you," he began, then winced at how that sounded. "Job opportunity, actually." Rose's laugh was unexpected, a genuine sound that drew looks from passing pedestrians. "A job opportunity? Just like that? Because you regularly hire people you meet on the street." Her intelligence and skepticism threw him off balance. This wasn't going according to his plan at all. "It's complicated," he admitted, "but I'm offering 6 months of housing, training, and a genuine chance at a corporate position. Everything provided: clothes, education, whatever you need." "And what's the catch?" Rose asked, adjusting the thin scarf around her neck. "There's always a catch." Damon opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Something in her direct gaze made lying feel impossible. "Why don't we discuss it over breakfast? There's a diner around the corner." Rose looked at her cart, then at the elderly man on the bench. "I can't leave my things, or Mr. Chen. He needs his medicine in an hour." Damon blinked, surprised by her priorities. "I can have someone watch your cart. And make sure Mr. Chen gets to a doctor." He pulled out his phone, ready to make calls. "No," Rose said firmly. "I'll get Kim from the shelter to watch my spot. And Mr. Chen doesn't need a doctor, he needs his regular medicine, which I have right here. He just needs help taking it because his hands shake." She paused, studying Damon's face. "If you want to talk, we do it my way. Give me 30 minutes to sort things out properly." Damon found himself nodding, fascinated despite himself. This woman, who owned nothing, was setting terms with a billionaire as if she held all the cards. In a way, he realized she did. Exactly 30 minutes later, they sat in a one booth at Jerry's Diner. Rose ordered only coffee, ignoring Damon's insistence that she could get whatever she wanted. The morning rush swirled around them, construction workers, office assistants, and street cleaners all grabbing their breakfast. "So," Rose said, wrapping her hands around the wall mug, "tell me about this catch." Over the next hour, Damon explained everything: the bet, the stakes, the transformation he proposed. He expected anger or outrage. Instead, Rose listened quietly, asking occasional pointed questions that revealed a sharp mind beneath her careful exterior. When he finished, she sat back, studying him with those penetrating eyes. "You know what's interesting?" she finally said. "You think you're offering to change my life. But you have no idea what my life was before this." She gestured to her worn clothes. 2 years ago, I was a library sciences major with a full scholarship. Then my mom got sick. Cancer. No insurance. I dropped out to care for her, spent everything we had on treatments. After she died, medical debt took the rest." Damon felt the ground shifting beneath his privileged assumptions. Before he could speak, Rose continued, "I'll take your offer, but not for your reasons. There are people on these streets, good people, who need help. If I can get into a position of power, maybe I can actually change things. Real change, not just charity from glass towers." She stood up, straightening her shabby coat with dignity. "I'll meet you tomorrow morning at 8. And Mr. Carter, don't ever mistake someone's circumstances for their worth. That's lesson 1. As Rose walked away, Damon sat in the noisy diner, his expensive coffee growing cold. He had come to offer salvation to someone he saw as beneath him. Instead, he'd found himself face to face with a person who might have more to teach him than he could ever teach her. He pulled out his phone, canceling his afternoon meetings. Somehow, watching the stock market didn't seem as important as it had yesterday. For the first time in years, Damon Carter felt like he might be the one about to be transformed. The luxury apartment Damon had arranged felt larger than the entire homeless shelter Rose had been staying in. She stood in the middle of the living room, her few possessions in a worn backpack, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture. The city stretched out below, looking very different from this height than it did from the streets. "Is it too much?" Damon asked, watching her reaction carefully. Over the past week, he'd learned to pay attention to the subtle shifts in her expression. "It's not about being too much," Rose replied, running her hand along the smooth kitchen counter. "It's about what this kind of space means. Do you know how many families this apartment could house?" Damon felt that now familiar twinge of discomfort. Since meeting Rose, these moments had become more frequent, times when his normal world suddenly looked different through her eyes. "Let's get started," he said, changing the subject. "We have a lot to cover." He pulled out a tablet with their day's schedule, but Rose was already shaking her head. "First, we need to go back downstairs," she said firmly. "I promised to help at the morning soup kitchen shift. Your schedule can wait 2 hours. "But," Damon began to protest, then stopped himself. "Okay, show me what you do." The next 2 hours changed something in Damon. He watched as Rose efficiently organized volunteers, calmed a distressed teenager, and made sure everyone got not just food, but a moment of genuine connection. She knew everyone's names, their stories, their struggles. Back in the apartment, Rose cleaned up while Damon sat at the dining table, lost in thought. "You're already an executive," he said suddenly. "Just not the kind I'm used to." Rose looked up from washing her hands. "Running a soup kitchen isn't exactly running a corporation, isn't it?" Damon pulled out his notebook. "You manage resources, coordinate volunteers, handle crises, maintain schedules, and keep everyone motivated. The only difference is the setting and the salary." For the first time, Rose smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Maybe. But your world has different rules. Rules I need to learn." They settled into a routine over the next few weeks. Mornings started with business basics: accounting, management theory, corporate structure. But it was the afternoons that really came alive. Rose challenged every assumption, asked questions that made Damon question practices he'd always taken for granted. "Why do corporations spend millions on team-building retreats?" she asked one day, "when real bonds are built through working together toward meaningful goals." She told him about how the shelter community came together during last winter's big freeze, everyone pooling resources and skills to keep people alive. During a lesson on corporate communication, Rose interrupted Damon's explanation of email etiquette. "You're teaching me to sound like everyone else," she said. "But isn't authentic communication more valuable than following templates?" Damon found himself looking forward to these discussions more than his regular business meetings. Rose brought perspectives he'd never considered, making him see his world through fresh eyes. One evening, after a particularly intense debate about corporate social responsibility, Damon realized something had shifted. He wasn't just teaching anymore, he was learning. Rose's questions about wealth inequality, about the responsibility of businesses to their communities, about the true meaning of success, they kept him awake at night. "You're different," his friend Richard commented during their weekly poker game. "The bet's changing you more than it's changing her." Damon dealt the cards, thinking about how Rose had spent that morning teaching him to repair a bicycle for one of the shelter kids. "Maybe that's not a bad thing," he replied. The transformation wasn't just professional. Rose's natural dignity began to blend with her new knowledge of corporate culture. She mastered the technical skills quickly, but refused to let go of her fundamental values. She attended business meetings in the morning and still volunteered at the shelter in the evening. One day, about 2 months into their arrangement, Rose presented Damon with a business proposal. "The corporation spends thousands on catering for events," she explained. "What if we contracted with a shelter-run catering service? We could provide job training, steady income, and business experience to people who need it most." Damon stared at the detailed plan, complete with budget projections and risk assessments. "This is incredible," he said slowly. "You've combined business efficiency with social impact." Rose shrugged, but her eyes shone with pride. "I'm just using what you taught me to do what I always wanted to do: help people." As they worked late into the evening refining the proposal, Damon realized that the bet's outcome no longer seemed important. Something much more valuable was taking shape, a partnership that could actually change lives, including his own. Looking at Rose confidently analyzing spreadsheets while simultaneously texting instructions to shelter volunteers, Damon understood that his original goal had been embarrassingly small. He hadn't bet on transforming someone into an executive. He'd stumbled into a chance to transform the very meaning of business success. 3 months into their arrangement, Damon found himself checking his watch during board meetings, eager to get back to his sessions with Rose. The corporate world that had once consumed his every waking moment now felt somehow hollow compared to their daily discussions about business ethics and social impact. That morning, they sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports when Rose pointed out something no one else had noticed. "These charitable donations," she said, tapping the screen, "they're just tax write-offs. The company could do so much more by investing in sustainable community programs." Damon leaned closer, caught up in her enthusiasm. Their shoulders brushed, and he felt that now familiar flutter in his chest. He'd been trying to ignore these feelings for weeks, telling himself it was just admiration for her intelligence and determination. "You should present these ideas at next week's board meeting," he suggested, trying to maintain his professional demeanor. "You're ready." Rose's eyes lit up, but then doubt crossed her face. "Are you sure? The board members will be impressed," Damon finished. "Trust me." The word trust hung heavy in the air between them. Trust had become the foundation of their relationship, though neither of them talked about how their dynamic had shifted from teacher and student to something less easily defined. Later that week, Damon was working late in his office when Richard dropped by unannounced. "Quite a protégé you found," he said, helping himself to Damon's premium whiskey. "The whole city's talking about her. The homeless woman turned corporate rising star." Something in his tone made Damon uncomfortable. "She's brilliant. She sees things differently." "Oh, I can see how differently you're seeing things too," Richard smirked. "Which is why I'm here. The other partners want to modify the bet's terms." Damon's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "If any romantic involvement develops between you and your project, you forfeit everything. Not just the 50 million, everything. Your voting shares, your position on the board, all of it." "That's ridiculous," Damon protested, but his voice sounded weak even to his own ears. "Is it? We've all seen how you look at her. This bet was about creating an executive, not finding love. Keep it professional or lose it all." After Richard left, Damon sat in his darkened office, city lights twinkling beyond his window. The thought of losing his company, his life's work, should have terrified him. Instead, he found himself thinking about Rose's laugh during their coffee breaks, the way her eyes sparked when she talked about making real change in the world. The next morning, Rose arrived early for their meeting, excited about her upcoming board presentation. But she stopped short when she saw Damon's face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said too quickly, putting physical distance between them. "Let's focus on your presentation." But something had changed. His responses became clipped, professional. He stopped joining her for coffee breaks. The easy warmth of their relationship froze over, replaced by formal politeness that hurt worse than coldness would have. Rose noticed, of course. She noticed everything. During their afternoon session, she finally broke. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Damon said, not meeting her eyes. "This is how it should be. Professional." "Professional," Rose repeated softly. She gathered her papers slowly, then paused at the door. "You know what's funny? I thought you were different. I thought you'd actually changed." That weekend, Damon threw himself into work, trying to ignore the ache in his chest. He was in his office Sunday morning when he overheard voices in the conference room next door. "The bet's going perfectly," Richard was saying. "Either he falls for her and loses everything, or he pushes her away and proves he's still the same cold-hearted businessman we all know. Either way, we win." Rose's voice, when it came, was filled with quiet fury. "You planned this from the start." Damon's blood ran cold. He hadn't known she was in the building. "Of course," Richard laughed. Damon needed to be taught a lesson about thinking he could change the natural order of things. "Though I must admit you've exceeded expectations. Too bad it was all built on a lie." The sound of quickly retreating footsteps told Damon that Rose had left. By the time he made it to the lobby, she was gone. Her security badge lay on the front desk, along with a stack of papers, her detailed proposals for community outreach programs, all the work they'd done together. Damon stood there, holding the badge, feeling like everything meaningful in his life was slipping through his fingers. He had tried to protect his company by pushing Rose away, only to lose something far more valuable, the trust of the one person who had made him want to be better. The city lights blurred as he looked out his office window that night, remembering how differently he'd seen the world from this same spot just months ago. Back then, he'd thought he was going to change someone's life. Instead, Rose had changed his, and he'd ruined it all trying to hold on to things that suddenly didn't seem important anymore. The shelter's familiar smell of bleach and old coffee hit Damon as he walked through its doors a week later. The volunteers he'd gotten to know during his time with Rose barely glanced at him, their cold shoulders speaking volumes. "She's not here," said Mr. Chen, the elderly man Rose had helped that first morning. He sat in his usual spot, carefully folding donated clothes. "Haven't seen her in days." Damon's heart sank. "Do you know where she might be?" "Even if I did," Mr. Chen replied, his weathered hands never stopping their work, "why should I tell you? She came back here in tears, packed her few things and left, said something about trust and lies." The words stung, but Damon knew he deserved them. He pulled out his phone, ready to mobilize his vast resources to find her, then stopped. That was exactly the kind of controlling behavior that had gotten him into this mess. Instead, he looked around the shelter, really looked. The leaking roof, the worn-out chairs, the ancient coffee maker sputtering in the corner. All things he could have fixed weeks ago, but hadn't even noticed when he was focused on transforming Rose. "Mr. Chen," he said slowly, putting his phone away, "what does this place need most?" The old man finally looked up, studying Damon's face. Whatever he saw there made him nod slightly. "Sit down, young man. Let me tell you about what really matters." Over the next few weeks, Damon threw himself into shelter work. Not with grand gestures or huge donations, but with time and sweat and learning. He fixed the roof himself alongside volunteer contractors. He learned how to operate the ancient washing machines that cleaned hundreds of loads of clothes each week. He sat with residents, learning their stories, understanding their needs. His corporate office called constantly, but he went in only when absolutely necessary. The bet, his reputation, the money, none of it seemed important anymore. He'd lost something far more valuable than any of that. One morning, while he was installing new shelving in the storage room, he overheard two volunteers talking. "Did you see the news? Someone's been buying up old buildings all over the city, turning them into affordable housing and job training centers." "Yeah, and they're hiring residents to do the renovation work, teaching them trade skills." Damon's hands stilled on the power drill. It sounded exactly like one of Rose's proposals, the ones she'd left behind that night. He spent the next day tracking down information. The buildings had been purchased through a series of small non-profits, all recently established. The paperwork was carefully done, the kind of work only someone with both street smarts and business training could manage. "She's doing it," he whispered to himself, pride and regret mixing in his chest. "She's actually doing it." That evening, as he helped serve dinner at the shelter, a new resident caught his attention. The man was describing how he'd just gotten a job at one of the new training centers. "The lady running it, she's something else," the man said, warming his hands around a coffee cup. "Used to be homeless herself. Says everyone deserves a chance to rebuild, but we gotta do the work ourselves. No handouts, just opportunities." Damon nearly dropped the soup ladle. "Where is this center?" The address led him to a converted warehouse in a struggling neighborhood. Through the windows, he could see people in classes, others learning construction skills, some working at computers. It was everything Rose had talked about, brought to life. He stood there for an hour, not going in, just watching. The sun was setting when a familiar figure emerged from the building. Rose looked different, not because of fancy clothes or styled hair, but because of the quiet confidence in her walk, the sense of purpose in her movements. She spotted him immediately but didn't seem surprised. "I wondered when you'd find this place," she said, walking over to lean against the wall beside him. "You did it," he said softly. "Everything we talked about, you made it real." "We had good ideas," she replied. "They deserved to be more than just proposals in a boardroom. Rose, I'm sorry, about everything. The bet belies my cowardice." She held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not interested in apologies, Damon. I'm interested in actions. What have you been doing since I left?" So he told her, about the shelter work, about learning to listen instead of trying to fix everything with money, about finally understanding what she'd been trying to teach him all along. Rose listened quietly, her expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. Finally, she spoke. There's a lot of work to be done. Real work, not corporate games or billionaire bets. Are you ready for that? Damon looked at the building, at the people inside working to rebuild their lives. He thought about how empty his penthouse felt now, how meaningless his old life seemed. Yes, he said simply. I'm ready. She nodded once, then pushed off from the wall. Good, because I need help setting up 3 more centers like this one, and I could use someone who knows their way around business paperwork. You interested? It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a chance, a real one, not based on bets or pride or proving anything to anyone. Just 2 people trying to make a difference, one building, one life at a time. When do we start? Damon asked. Rose smiled, and for the first time in weeks, hope flickered in his chest. We start now, she said. There's always work to be done. The annual charity gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel buzzed with the city's elite, all dressed in their finest. But this year was different. Instead of the usual socialites and celebrities, half the attendees were from community organizations and local shelters. Damon stood at the podium, his heart pounding as he looked out over the mixed crowd. 3 months ago, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves, I thought I knew everything about success. I measured it in dollars, in stock prices, in the height of my buildings. He paused, finding Mr. Chen's encouraging nod from his table. I was wrong. The room fell silent, crystal glasses stopping halfway to lips, conversations dying mid-sentence. It wasn't every day they saw one of their own about to break ranks. Many of you know about a bet I made, Damon continued. A bet that I could turn someone from the streets into an executive. I thought I was offering someone a chance at a better life. He smiled ruefully. Instead, I learned what a better life really means. In the back of the room, hidden behind a pillar, Rose watched. She hadn't told Damon she was coming tonight, but she needed to see this for herself. The woman I tried to help taught me more than I could ever teach her. She showed me that real success isn't about climbing higher than everyone else. It's about building elevators so others can rise too. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his front row seat as Damon continued. So today, I'm not just admitting to that shameful bet. I'm doing something about it. I'm announcing the creation of a new foundation with an initial funding of $500 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. In the back, Rose's hands tightened around her program. But this isn't another charitable foundation where rich people feel good about giving handouts, Damon said firmly. This is different. It will be run by the people it serves, those who know best what their communities need. Every program will focus on creating sustainable change through education, job training, and business opportunities. He pulled out a familiar stack of papers, Rose's original proposals. These plans, created by someone society had written off as just another homeless person, are better than anything my highly paid consultants have ever produced. They show us how to create real change, not just temporary fixes. In the audience, Richard stood up, his face red. You're throwing away your reputation, your position in society. Damon smiled. No, I'm finally earning them. Oh, and Richard? About that bet, I forfeit, but not because I failed. Because the whole premise was wrong. You can't transform someone's life if you don't understand what really matters in life yourself. He stepped away from the podium, ignoring the explosion of whispers and camera flashes. Making his way through the crowd, he found himself face to face with Rose. I didn't know you'd be here, he said softly. I needed to see if you meant it, she replied. All of it. Every word. He gestured to the chaos around them. I'm probably going to lose some business partners over this. And gain better ones. Rose handed him a folder. While you've been working on your speech, I've been busy too. 20 small business owners from our training programs want to partner with your company. Real partnerships, not charity cases. They have skills, dedication, and ideas that could transform your business. Damon opened the folder, scanning the proposals inside. They were brilliant, innovative solutions that combined business efficiency with social impact. This is amazing, he breathed. But why help me after everything? Rose's eyes met his. Because you finally understood what I've been saying all along. Real change doesn't come from one person helping another. It comes from people working together, each bringing their own strengths to the table. The room had quieted, people watching their interaction with undisguised curiosity. Rose squared her shoulders, facing them all with quiet dignity. "Your foundation announcement was good," she said. "But these partnerships? This is how we really change things. Not through charity, but through opportunity. Not through transformation, but through collaboration." Damen looked at the crowd, the wealthy in their expensive clothes, the community leaders in their modest suits, all watching, waiting to see what would happen next. "Then let's show them how it's done," he said, offering his hand. "Partners?" Rose looked at his hand for a long moment, then took it firmly. "Partners," she agreed. "But this time, we do it right. No bets, no games, no trying to change each other. Just honest work for real change." As they turned to face the crowd together, Damen realized that he'd finally found what he'd been looking for all along. Not redemption through grand gestures, but purpose through meaningful action. Not transformation of others, but growth alongside them. The room erupted in applause, not the polite kind usually heard at these events, but genuine, hopeful applause from people who recognized that something real was happening. Something that could actually change lives, including their own. 1 year later, the converted warehouse hummed with activity. What had started as a single-job training center had grown into a network of community development hubs across the city. Damen walked through the busy halls, exchanging greetings with students and instructors alike. No one batted an eye at the billionaire in work boots and a simple button-down shirt anymore. He stopped to help a young woman struggling with a heavy box of textbooks. "These are for the new business class?" he asked, recognizing the titles. "Yes," she beamed. "I'm teaching it next semester. Can you believe it? Last year I was sleeping in my car, and now I'm helping others start their own businesses." These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. The past year had been challenging. Some board members had resigned in protest of his new direction, old friends had distanced themselves, and the society pages had buzzed with speculation about his mental breakdown. But for every loss there had been unexpected gains. New partnerships had formed with innovative small business owners. The company's profits had actually increased, powered by fresh ideas and passionate new talent. Most importantly, real change was happening in communities that had long been ignored. He found Rose in her office, surrounded by blueprints for their newest project, converting an abandoned mall into a mixed-use space for affordable housing and small businesses. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with that smile that still made his heart skip. "Just got the final approval from the city council," she said, holding up a document. "We can start construction next month." Damen sat down across from her desk, remembering how different things had been a year ago. Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose rather than any artificial deadlines or bets. "Remember when you first pitched this idea?" he asked. "Back when I thought I was supposed to be teaching you?" Rose laughed, the sound echoing through the open office door. "You were so sure you had all the answers. Now look at you, learning construction skills from our training program graduates." "Best education I've ever had," he admitted, "though I still have the scars from that first attempt at drywalling." They worked together through the afternoon, fine-tuning plans and solving problems. It felt natural now, this partnership. Each bringing their own strengths to the table, neither trying to change the other, both growing together. As evening approached, they walked to their favorite diner, the same one where they'd had their first real conversation. Jerry, the owner, waved them to their usual booth. He'd seen their relationship evolve from awkward beginnings to comfortable companionship to something deeper. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Rose said, stirring her coffee. "That first morning when you came to make your proposition. I was so sure you were just another rich guy trying to feel good about himself." "I was," Damen admitted. "But someone very wise helped me see that real change starts with changing yourself." Rose reached across the table, taking his hand. "We both changed, and we're still changing. That's what makes this work." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. They looked out the window to see a group of graduates from their first training program celebrating their new business launch. The young entrepreneurs waved excitedly when they spotted Rose and Damen. "Should we join them?" Damen asked, already knowing the answer. They spent the evening listening to dreams and plans, offering advice where needed, but mostly just witnessing the incredible potential being unleashed. These weren't just success stories. They were proof that when people are given real opportunities and treated with dignity, amazing things happen. Later, walking back to the center in the cool evening air, Damon stopped at the spot where he'd first seen Rose helping Mr. Chen. "You know, I thought I was going to change someone's life with that bet," he said. "Instead, you changed mine. You changed everything." Rose squeezed his hand. "We changed things together. And we're not done yet." She was right. They had plans, big plans. More training centers, more affordable housing, more opportunities for people to build their own success stories. But now it wasn't about one person helping another. It was about building a community where everyone could rise together. "Partners?" Damon asked, echoing their agreement from the gala a year ago. "In everything," Rose replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. As they walked on, hand in hand, Damon thought about how far they'd come from that first morning. He'd wanted to win a bet by transforming someone's life. Instead, he'd found something far more valuable: true partnership, meaningful purpose, and a love that had transformed them both. The city stretched out around them, not divided into high towers and street levels anymore, but full of possibilities, connections, and chances for change. They had work to do, challenges to face, more lives to touch. But they would do it together, as equals, proving that the greatest transformations happen not when we try to change others, but when we open ourselves to being changed by love.